very warm, happy evening to everybody present here. Medico-Pastoral Association is celebrating its 50 years of service, and commemorating this achievement, we are having the lecture series part 2 today. We initiated this lecture series as celebration of the 50 years of service in February, and today we're going to have the lecture series 2. In order to welcome all of you today for today's lecture series, I now invite Mrs. Deepanjana Das Basu, the Treasurer of MPA. Please give the welcome address, which would be followed by the prayer by MPA staff and resident, Mrs. Mary Stella, Mrs. Anita, Ms. Kritika, and Ms. Lodes.
So, Swagatam. Good evening to all of you. It is my proud privilege to welcome you all on behalf of the Medico-Pastoral Association. 2022 marks the Golden Jubilee of the Association, and to observe the Suvarna Jayanti, we are having monthly programs for public education and awareness in mental health. This is the second such lecture and commemorating the International Women's Day. I warmly welcome Dr. Padmavati, the Director of SCARF, Chennai, who is a guest of honor this evening. We are delighted, Madam, that you so readily agreed to speak MPA's association with SCARF and look to marching forward together in the interest of mental health. I also welcome Dr. Gladys Sumitra and Mrs. Tilaka Bhaskaran, our very own ladies who have dedicated many years of service to MPA and who will be felicitated today. I also extend a warm welcome to all our resident and the members of the MPA family. We begin with a prayer. So may I now request Ms. Stella to invoke the Almighty on behalf of all of us. Thank you.
Now I hand over to the MC of the evening, Dr. Aarti Jagannath,
who is not just a life member of the Medico-Pastoral Association, but also the lifeline for MPA and for all of us guiding us who are part of MPA, who will give us the overview of the Golden Jubilee celebration. Over to you, sir.
The Medico-Pastoral Association was registered as the first non-governmental organization in the field of mental health in India. It was Dr. Joyce Romani who was the founder secretary, and right from those days, one of the persons behind starting of these non-governmental organizations who encouraged the starting of MPA was the director of NIMHANS, the then director of National Institute of Mental Health and Neuroscience, Dr. R.M. Verma. Why I'm mentioning this is, as I watched the program, the Master of Ceremonies is Dr. Aarti Jagannath, who is a senior faculty in the Department of Social Work of National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences. And as she is doing this program, she is sitting in front of the logo of NIMHANS. So 50 years, Medico-Pastoral Association and NIMHANS have been working together on numerous issues of mental health. During the Golden Jubilee Committee and the Managing Committee of Medico-Pastoral Association has decided to carry on a number of programs. And it was decided that instead of 3rd August 2022, the program would begin 6 months in of that date, and it will go on for 6 more months after the program. So we are going to, first to the program is a series of 12 awareness building lectures, being the month of the International Women's Day. Two distinguished past secretaries of Medico-Pastoral Association will be felicitated. There are numerous other programs which the Golden Jubilee Committee has planned to carry out. You know, there are many things in the annual. One of them is a awareness building film festival of mental health related films, maybe working on rehabilitation needs of people with chronic and severe mental illness. So there are numerous programs, but we are certain that we will continue with these monthly programs. And it's my great pleasure to, give you very briefly what we plan to do during the Golden Jubilee. Thank you very much. And back to the Master of Ceremonies.
Which is felicitation of 2 of the distinguished members of Medico-Pastoral Association who have contributed immensely to the organization for many, many years. First is Dr. Gladys Sumitra, who is the ex-secretary and ex-treasurer of MPA. And we will also be felicitating Mrs. Tilaka Bhaskaran, who is the ex-secretary of MPA. I now call upon Mrs. Anita Charles, who is staff at MPA, to read the citation about Dr. Gladys Sumitra to the audience. Could I also request the admin to mute everybody so that there's no disturbance?
Dr. Gladys Sumitra, a master's in economics. She served as a lecturer for 5 years in MES College and Central College, Bangalore. Then came a 25-year stint of almost 3 decades in the government of Karnataka in planning, economic advisory division, perspective planning division, and several major projects and panels. She was deputed as a visiting scientist at the Department of Management Studies, Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, and also as Director, Training International Energy Initiative. After retirement, Dr. Sumitra was reappointed as a senior research scientist by the government. Her talent in policy making and training are well appreciated. Her work also saw her serve on projects with the Government of India and with international collaboration. An active life member of the Medico-Pastoral Association for decades, Dr. Gladys Sumitra was elected its honorary secretary in the year 2004 at a time when the association was facing survival issues in terms of its location. Dr. Sumitra took up the responsibility of sorting this matter out and went about it seriously and painstakingly, never tiring of making innumerable trips at sorting out bureaucratic tangles to ensure that MPA has its own land at a reasonable price. She held her office with great dignity, with a sharp eye for ensuring that work by any executive or office bearer was completed on time. Her meticulous attention to detail and her rectitude were much admired assets to the association. She was devotedly involved in the revision of the Memorandum of Association of the MPA during her tenure as secretary, an office she held being elected unopposed for 10 years. Later, she served the association as honorary treasurer for almost 3 years. The MPA places on record its association of the Women of Substance on the occasion of International Women's Day 2020.
Thank you, Mrs. Anita. I would now invite Dr. Joseph George, President MPA, Dr. Mohan Isaac, ex-president and life member of MPA, and Mr. Samuel Mohan, Secretary MPA, to felicitate Dr. Gladys Sumitra. One and all. We now move on to our next felicitation. I'd invite Mrs. Halya Vedagopal, Councillor at MPA, to please read out the citation about Mrs. Tilaka Bhaskar.
It's my immense pleasure to read about citation of Mrs. Tilaka Bhaskaran with a master's degree in nutrition and dietetics from the Women's Christian College, Chennai. Mrs. Tilaka Bhaskaran worked in the Christian Medical College, Vellore, at its Nutrition Research Center. Her work was on protein energy malnutrition as an ICMR. Research fellow for 4 years, she then married a civil servant and moved with him to different places all over India and with a varied career. She taught at her alma mater, WC. Later in 2018, she was awarded the Illustrious Alumna Award by the college. With her family, Mrs. Tilaka Bhaskaran shifted to Shillong in the Northeast India, where she taught at St. Mary's College. Working in the Northeastern Hill University in the Nash, she was exposed to all colleges in the Northeast. Holding camps and programs, she was teacher of postgraduate students in Avinasha Lingam Deemed University, Coimbatore, for 6 years. During that period, she became interested in wildlife and was trained in Mudumalai by a team of US Fish and Wildlife Service to conduct wildlife camp. Mrs. Tilaka Bhaskaran then worked in St. John's Medical College, Bangalore for years at the Nutrition Research Center in charge of field-related research program and also worked in collaboration with Italian Nutrition Research Center. She completed a course in Food and Nutrition Program Management in Netherlands. She was 5 years prior to retirement principal of the MGR Janaki Women's Postgraduate College in Chennai. Her multifarious interests have seen her write a popular fortnightly column in a prestigious newspaper on gardening, and her keen interest in sewing has led her to publish articles on designing. In fact, it was the latter talent which brought her to Medico-Pastoral Association to help in occupational therapy for our residents. She was also an early volunteer and current volunteer of Sahai Helpline. She served as secretary of the Medico-Pastoral Association from 2014 to 2017. Our association with MPA continues to this day. A genuine and empathetic nature endures to us, and we are pleased to honor her as a woman of substance on the International Women's Day 2022. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ahalya. I now invite Mrs. Hema Kumar, Mr. Alphonse Purian, and Dr. Ajit Bhire to please carry out the honors of felicitating Mrs. Tilaka Bhaskaran. Alphonse and Dr. Ajit Bhire. I now invite Dr. Gladys Sumitra to speak a few words on this occasion and tell us how she helped empower MPA with her guidance all these years to us. Thank you. Please invite Madam onto the dais.
At the outset, I wish to express my gratitude to the management and MPA family for extending your invitation to the happy event of 50th year celebration. However, I have reluctantly accepted your decision to honor me, the reasons for which will be obvious in my brief narration. Celebration of Golden Jubilee is a happy occasion in wedding anniversaries, birthdays, and life of institutions. Completing 50 is significant on such events, but one has to go deeper into the number, and gold represents the same. It has symbolic significance. It represents a milestone in the journey. That is important. Another important difference between wedding and birthdays on one hand and life of an institution on the other is life of an institution has no end, provided dedicated efforts are made in this direction. This 50th year in the life of MPA, it is a hybrid combination of all the symbols that gold represents: health, strength, and maturity. In the life of MPA, through continuous, concerted, dedicated, and sacrificial efforts of several professionals in the field of mental health, complemented by experts from other related fields and rich experience gained over this long period, we have the joy of witnessing completion of 50 years of humanitarian service as opposed to commercial activity. There are still more milestones to reach, many new challenges to face. This is the time to look back, to look at the current changing scenario, and to think afresh our vision and strategies. My association with MPA goes back to a little over 2 decades. I entered this area of service as a total illiterate in the field of mental health, and hence diffidence in shouldering responsibilities. I'm grateful to all the committee members and staff from the beginning for being with me and supporting during all the challenging times. I could feel the benefits of teamwork during times of stress and burden of work. I'm also grateful to God, the Almighty, who has been with me at every stage. Looking back, I want to share just one rich experience which shows God's leading, encouraging, and supporting all of us working out His plans outside the walls of MPA. He took care of all the impossibilities at every step, changing the hearts of all the concerned. It relates to the owning the land on which infrastructural facilities had been created for mental rehabilitation through holistic approach. MPA was functioning on leased land for 30 years, given by the then municipal corporation with the condition of no profit. Ahead of the expiry of the lease in 2004, the management requested the corporation to renew the lease. Reply received was that government has withdrawn the leasing system and offered MPA to buy the land for 4.25 crores. And I don't think we had even 40 lakhs with us, that too belonging to the residents' families. When the service was provided, abiding by the condition of no profit, the biggest challenge was how to get this amount, that too within a short period stipulated. It's here, please listen, that I want to share hands of God acting, which none of us in MPA knew towards such a possibility. In the government order, discontinuing leasing system and giving option of purchase at guidance value, there was one specific clause providing for up to 50% concession for mental health institutions only. Why? Many officers were involved in giving the benefit of this clause. At every stage, God was at work enabling the officers with wisdom and changing their hearts for the needs. MPA received the order granting land to registration fee at 50%, concession. Thanks to the generous contribution of donors, MC members, staff, some of them are here, including who sacrificed by parting with their SSS money as a loan, and residents' families who agreed to utilizing their deposits. Also, the overdraft facility created by late Father Jovita, the required amount could be raised within the stipulated time. Land was registered in the name of MPA 2006. The entire process was completed without illegal payments at any stage. Here also God was working. Thus, we are standing on a holy ground and not a burial ground. On this occasion, in this Herculean task, I wish to recall the wholehearted support of MC members and in particular, dedicated services of Mr. Krishnan, then treasurer, and Ms. Vinnarasi, then accountant, who managed to handle the last 2.5 crores remittances to the corporation, clearing the liabilities of over 1 crore with then available limited computer technology. All were instruments in his hands. In the current situation, you are all aware, just to highlight the challenges posed by pandemic. Policies of the government affecting the academic life of students at various stages, leading to frustration. Finance constraints faced at the global level and policies shrinking availability of funds local to the NGOs due to various policies. The latest is the possible consequence of war. Looking ahead, more unknown may also emerge. Consequence is the demand-supply gap, qualitative and quantitative, in the professional areas of mental health, management skills. These gaps are to be disaggregated with due attention to both positive and negative developments. When MPA was conceived by late Dr. Joyce Shiromani and the team, the vision focus was the emerging challenges from urbanization and industrialization. A relook at the dominant factors likely to play in the context of our vision and mission is required. Accordingly, our focus and strategies. Compassion and dedication should continue to be the pillars, trusting in the power of the Almighty who has guided us thus far, with best wishes in all your endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam, for your insightful anecdote. At least for people like me, it's really inspiring to know that there have been so many contributors, so many people who have been behind the force of MPA to bring it to the level that is today. And of course, the Almighty's blessings, as you rightly said. I now invite Mrs. Tilaka Bhaskaran to share a few words on this occasion.
Good evening, friends. I'm happy to be standing here to accept your felicitations. My association with MPA goes back many years. As many of you know, MPA was born out of the industrial missions run by St. Mark's Cathedral. As a young researcher in nutrition, I was working in CMC Vellore in 64, 65. I was invited to give a talk in Tamil for a workshop conducted by the Industrial Mission. The talk was on infant nutrition to others. That was my first association with the institution, which later gave birth to MPA. My next contact was when my husband was posted here. We were here for about 9 years. And there was a kind of a 25th anniversary MPA celebration. I remember attending that at the Chaudaya Hall, if I'm right. Yes. I didn't have much time for MPA at that time. That was my only association since Carlos Welches were here, and we got to know about it more through them. In 2007, when we shifted to Bangalore from Chennai, we lived in a flat close by, just opposite to the Bangalore East Railway Station. Our daughter, Mithila, a clinical psychologist, was a volunteer for Sahara. She put me in touch with MPA and said, Amma, now that you have retired and you have a lot of time on hand, why don't you walk over there and see what help they need? They can do with some volunteers. So that's how I came into MPA. And as I mentioned, dress designing was part of my hobby. I volunteered to work with the occupation therapy group and worked with them for some years. The last 15 years of my association with MPA has been an enriching one for me. It has provided opportunities for me to learn and grow. It has expanded my worldview. I have been able to develop a sensitivity to the emotional issues that affect our lives. I have met interesting people and developed new friendships. On the whole, it has been a satisfying experience, me working with MPA. My retirement years have become meaningful. I'm happy I was able to contribute whatever I could do to the welfare of this institution. With all humility, I accept this honor.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Tilaka Bhaskaran. I now invite both Dr. Gladys and Mrs. Tilaka to please light the lamp as a symbol to initiate today's lecture series. I also invite all the dignitaries who are in the audience to please join both of them in lighting the lamp. let this lighting of the lamp signify many more new beginnings and many more activities in MPA's future. I now invite Dr. Ajit Bhide, who is the Vice President of MPA and a very active and supportive member of all the activities that are being done in MPA, to introduce the guest speaker for the lecture series 2 today. Dr. Ajit.
It is an honor for me to introduce our guest speaker today, who is also our guest of honor. Padmavati Ramchandran is currently director of the Schizophrenia Research Foundation. Padma, as we affectionately call her, did her undergraduate studies at the Sion Hospital in Mumbai, completed her postgraduate psychiatry degree at the University of Bombay, India, and since then has been with the Schizophrenia Research Foundation, better known by its acronym SCARF, Chennai, for over 30 years. She has been involved in several research areas, such as epidemiological studies, drug trials, dealing with untreated schizophrenia, the effect of culture on psychosis, metabolic disorders and mental illness. She is the co-investigator for the short form INTREPID-2 study. She has been closely involved in SCARF community mental health programs and their well-known pioneering telepsychiatry project. Her key interests have been in sociocultural aspects of mental illness. She has conducted research in the areas of stigma in mental illness and in physical comorbidities in the devastating illness of schizophrenia. With a keen interest in psychosocial rehabilitation, she has been responsible for establishing the Department of Psychosocial Rehabilitation at SCARF, which provides a needs-based psychosocial intervention program for persons accessing SCARF clinical services for treatment and rehabilitation. She has published a number of peer-reviewed national and international journals. Padma is a reviewer of many national and international psychiatric journals and is the associate editor of the International Journal of Mental Health Systems. She serves on several institutional review boards. She teaches postgraduate students of psychiatry and is a guide for postgraduate dissertations as well. Padma is a dear friend and has somewhat recently, taken over as the director of SCARF, and we are very proud of her. Also, when we decided to observe the International Women's Day, we wanted an eminent women speaker. Nobody could be more suitable. Padma will be speaking to us today on dealing with schizophrenia. What matters most to the woman? Over to Dr. Padmavati.
Thank you, Dr. Bhide, for the introduction. And I'm very thankful to the MPA and its entire team here for inviting me to deliver this lecture. I hope I am audible because the network seems to be a little difficult now, but I hope I'm audible, Aarti.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's really humbling to be at a function where two dedicated stalwarts of MPA were being felicitated. Thank you, Madam Gladys, as well as Madam Tilakam. And here, having worked with a number of women in the field, I can certainly, relate to what you were saying about the struggles of MPA and where MPA is today. I'm really honored to be here speaking to you all about a topic which is quite close to my heart and my work. And I will just share my slides in a few minutes, but I take this opportunity to thank MPA and all your members for all the work that you all are doing for persons with serious mental illnesses. So today, when Dr. Ajit Bhide called me to ask if I would talk, so my first thought was, basically, whenever I get invited to talk, it's usually about some research work. And so I was wondering, okay, what should I be talking about? Should I be talking about prevalence of metabolic disorders, this or that? And, a lot of ideas came to my mind. But then I thought it's time to just put away all the research evidence to an academic field and really talk from the heart. And which is why when I got a message from Mrinalini, I quickly put down the title and I said, this is what I want to think about when I am talking. Because as I was preparing for this presentation, it really, took me back over the 3 decades that I've been working with SCARF and trying to answer this question, what matters most to the woman with schizophrenia? Why do we need a conversation around schizophrenia in women? Really, the prevalence and incidence of schizophrenia are fairly stable across both genders, across very many reported studies. And there are no clear trends in mortality. Although, suicides seem to be more in women with schizophrenia. Women certainly have a better outcome than men. There are a number of studies which have indicated this. They do have a better pre-morbid functioning. Also, the Madras longitudinal study done by Dr. Tara now it's over almost 35 years, but her early publications did indicate a better outcome in women after 5 years of follow-up. So why do we need to talk about this specifically? I'm sure this August gathering will understand the plenty of narratives that are there with respect to functioning, the societal pressures, marriages, pregnancies, etc., stigma and discrimination, distress, physical health amongst women with schizophrenia, and so on and so forth. I can just continue this list. It's really never ending. I'm going to try and put before you a lot of stories. Many of these stories are some things that we've all heard time and again. But I do think we really, we've got to stop to think what really matters in these situations. You look at the presentation profiles. Women have more affective symptoms. They're more overtly hostile. They're physically active, dominating, and more emotional than men. I refrained from putting in references here because I do not want this to be a kind of evidence-based research presentation. I would urge all of us to think about, what would really matter to women in this area. Women have more sexual delusions. Women have more paranoid symptoms, more anxiety and less of negative symptoms. And of course, we are all aware of the depression that schizophrenia can cause in women. The impact of all these presentations actually goes across patients, families, and the environment as a whole. The story matters really. Again, here's a story which you would have all heard about. But let me recite it. S is a bright 17-year-old girl doing her first year in engineering. Few months into the course, she refuses to go to college, giving no reason. When insisted, she becomes agitated, locks herself into her room, and cries for long hours. She does not sleep or eat. She stops communicating with her family. She neglects her hygiene. She was found muttering and smiling to herself at times. On inquiry, she said, everyone at college is talking badly about me. She could hear them saying such things even when she was at home. And she felt someone in college did not like her and orchestrated these comments. Now, I'm sure most of you will agree that this is not an uncommon story. And why am I relating to it? Let me just try and understand in the context of functioning. Whom does it matter to most? It matters more to the caregiver. The mother says, she does no work at all. She's simply sleeping all day. She's not taken a bath for more than a week. She talks to no one. Even when visitors come home, she goes in and will not come out. And what does our young girl say? She says, I'm tired all day, so I can't work. The voices tell me not to take a bath. I wash the vessels. But she, referring to her mother, she says, she always tells me that I don't do a good job and does everything herself again. Why should I wash them? So you can imagine that this, the effect of the illness on the functioning this is just an example. This is just an example, and it definitely, matters to the caregiver to a large extent. Now let's try and look at the relationship with the family. Symptoms can hamper the relationship. Being treated derogatively by the family. We've heard several terms that are used. Mental, Paithyam in Tamil, or Pagal in Hindi. And these are not just commonplace terms. To a woman who's affected by the illness, these words, these terms can have an immense impact on the way they are affected by, it's really disheartening to the woman to hear these words thrown at her. Just to give you an example, a father of a now 30-year-old woman has this to say. He says she has not left the house for over 5 years. And actually, when you go into the story, he was the one who was not letting her out of the house. Why? Because she is a mental patient. He does not use the term schizophrenia. He does not know it. But he uses the term mental patient. And therefore, he has not allowed her to leave the house for over 5 years. Of course, she is not treated at all. A reluctant spouse rants on how well he takes care of his patient. Here, the patient is his wife. So in a way, you look at the way the environment can actually hamper the relationship with the family, relationship of the patient with the family. And definitely, there will be an effect on the recovery of the patient. In this context, I would also like to bring to your attention the concept of expressed emotions. We haven't seen literature on expressed emotions over the last 3 decades since it was first published in the Indian population. Maybe there were reasons for why it was not, really used as a concept in our setting. I'm not going to go into all that, but let me bring to your attention what could have really affected our patient. So we have a young woman who's 23, psychotic for 4 years, living in a crowded slum area in Chennai. She lives with her mother, father, and 3 brothers, all in a single room tenement. Ours is very symptomatic. She has a diagnosis of schizophrenia and she's absolutely dysfunctional. The neighbors are very well-meaning. All our neighbors are usually quite well-meaning, but they are also quite intrusive. The mother is critical and hostile, shouting at the daughter, easily getting angry, and making statements like, oh, she's just acting. The father is indifferent, and the brothers simply disappear from the scene, just come home to sleep in the night. We have other expressed emotion domains like the emotional over-involvement or warmth and positive regard. And I'm sure occasionally we do see, the domains of warmth and positive regard do play a role in the presentations and maybe to a certain extent in relapse prevention as well as the recovery of the individual. Now let's look at work. Here is another big challenge. So she came to treatment at SCARF and she recovered pretty well. When I mean recovered, she symptomatically recovered. But we had to also help her improve her function. There was a tailoring class in her slum community, but that tailoring class did not want to enroll her because 1, she was Paithyam. 2, what will happen if she becomes aggressive? 3, maybe she is not going to be able to learn anything. She does not have the intelligence. On the other hand, you have T, an engineering graduate, who has been searching for a suitable job for several years now. It's not that she did not get jobs, but in her definition, those jobs were not suitable for her. Symptoms were a deterrent, but so was her family. They really didn't want a pretty affluent family, so they didn't really want her going to work and so on. However, one of the, the positive effects of COVID, it did give her an opportunity to work from home. Today, it matters a lot to T that she is employed and that she has her own money to spend. Let's look at the societal pressures. And here I'm going to be focusing on marriage and pregnancies. Marriages, young married girls are of, we know many stories where young married girls are sent back to parental home because of their abnormal behavior. Abnormal as defined by the family into which young girls are married into. The spouse's family simply don't want them back at all. On the other hand, you have a young woman with schizophrenia who gets pregnant. There are challenges during pregnancy, there are during pregnancy, and of course, childbirth. I'm sure many of you here are able to relate to what I'm saying. That, the myths and misconceptions that surround, marriage, surround the institution of, like, one of the commonest reasons why young people get married, as mental health professionals, we don't get marriage most often. Or if we do get invited to the marriage, it will be with a subtle comment that, I'm sure you do not have the time to attend the wedding, doctor. Or very often we get the invitation after the girl is married and she comes back home to the parent, to the doctor and say, we don't know what to do now. Why? She's not taken her medications for 1 month and so she's back. So this is an issue that is a very common issue, but it matters so much to. There was a time when I would actually, getting their young daughters married. Well, I was very young and naive at that time, I must say. Till I realized that it's really not my, say. They do ask you, but it's more a kind of just a context in which they ask the doctor, but not really, seriously mean to take any of your suggestions here. The trauma of separation from the baby after birth is something which is, which I think not just matters to, but also to the mental health professional. I mean, you see a young lady whose baby is taken away by the husband's family and the woman is not asked to come back to her husband's house. It's so painful to a young girl. They just think that this lady is not going to be able to take care. They just think that, she does not have the emotions to relate to the baby. Relationship with others. I think this is again a very common story. Avoidance. Our friend from the slum, her friends in the neighborhood avoid her. She has no calls from her school friends. More recent times, we are also hearing stories about intimate relationships. Jay lives in the city. She hails from a very affluent family. She develops psychosis and her boyfriend of 2+ years does not want to continue the relationship. He says he's scared of her. Self-image. How have you ever asked a woman with schizophrenia for several years, when has she last visited a beauty parlor or gone shopping to buy a new sari? So, at Scarf Center, when we did this Disability Day celebrations, several times women have come and asked me, do I look pretty, doctor? Because, they've actually really been made up for this Disability Day celebrations. So I would, tell the center staff, maybe you should have a Disability Day celebration every day of the year so that people, like to feel pretty, like to feel that they are looking good. What mattered to this to this middle-aged woman was the need for validation, that she was just like you and me. It mattered to her that she wanted to look good to other people. And this is where I must remind ourselves about Ratnaboli Ray of Anjali in Kolkata, where she, did some pioneering work in trying to, get women to look good. There's some lovely videos which you can watch about the impact of, how it mattered so much to the woman with schizophrenia on how they looked in a pretty sari or how they looked in, when they were made up. Big challenge, accessing mental health care. We know of several stories where people have actually accessed care long after the onset of the illness. So we have the story of a female 29-year-old and her mother S, 56, both with a diagnosis of schizophrenia. They live in Neyveli. We returns home 1 month after her wedding, sent back by her spouse and in-laws. But the access to mental health services was 1 year later, despite the fact that the spouse had actually called up the father and said, look, I think something is wrong. I see her talking to herself. I see that she's not taking a bath. I'm pretty sure that you need to take psychiatric help. And but then no, why do they delay the access? Mother thinks there's no problem. She blames the spouse and the in-laws for weak returning home. But the father worries about what the medicines given by the psychiatrist will do to his dear daughter. Access to mental health services happens 1 year later after the father retires from his service. History and examination confirms a diagnosis in both the mother and the daughter. Treatment is initiated, but compliance takes a long time. Today, as I examine V and S, for a mental status examination, I find that they are still symptomatic. Both are still hearing voices. Both are still responding to delusions that they have. But the father strongly believes that both are fine. Is there a blinding that is happening? What really matters here to both V and S is a question we need to start thinking for ourselves. Coming to the drugs we prescribe. The young lady has come in for a review and asks, when will you stop my medicines, doc? Have you ever thought of what it does to me? I'm sure a number of psychiatrists sitting in the audience today would have been asked these questions time and again. And what do I respond? I ask her back, what do you think will happen if I stopped your medications? Do you remember what happened when you stopped it last time? I think I'm pretending to be diplomatic. I think I'm pretending to be quite, I'm just trying to reassure her that she needs medications. She needs to do what I tell her to do. But did I ever stop to think how being on medication matters to her? And these are questions that I've really been asking myself. And I'm sure a number of the doctors in the audience today would actually may have done the same thing, may not have done the same thing, but I'd certainly like to appreciate a feedback here. Leisure time activities. Oh, there are plenty. I did not want to list out watching TV, going to the cinema, whatever. I didn't want to list it out. But I wonder whether we really give our young women patients their choices, their opportunities. And I'm sure you'll all agree with me that the importance of this cannot be underestimated. Physical health. I really got interested in the physical health of my mentally ill women patients when I have had a couple of them drop dead in our own institution. Nothing seemed to be wrong with him. Then, of course, in one of the instances, the woman refused to have an ECG done simply because she was very delusional actually when she got admitted. Within 1 month of admission, she just simply drops dead. We don't know why that happened. So we all know that physical morbidity and mortality associated with with a diagnosis of schizophrenia costs are, the problems are immense there. The cardiometabolic risks that entail, maybe because of medication, maybe because of lifestyle, maybe because of genetics, we still do not have answers despite years of research. There's some evidence that is now coming up, but we still do not really know. Problems with the teeth, problems with the skin, the menstrual cycle, and most importantly, the body weight. I think these physical health problems matter a lot, and we really need to stop and think about it. We've talked so far about the woman with schizophrenia. But I would also like to stop for a moment and reflect on the woman as a family caregiver. She's the one at home most of the times to take care. She's the one who faces the crisis, and be it of either gender. She's the one in distress. She's the one who's angry and many a times guilty. And also at times she has to face the annoyed mental health professional. Have we stopped to ask what matters to her? Here, of course, I must add that the COVID lockdown threw up several instances when men folk were at home to see the impact of the illness. I had one gentleman who walked in and said, I never realized what my wife was going through all these years. And his daughter was ill for more than 10 years. And he said, this is the first time I realized what she was going through, what my wife was going through. And I think I should start taking more interest. And that was the first time I'd seen him in the outpatient opens and look at the woman who's a mental health professional. And I'm really delighted to be here on this occasion where we've had two women. I mean, I also call both the women who are felicitated today as mental health professionals for the years of service rather than their, academic degrees. The years of service actually, I think qualify for them to be treated as a mental health women. So thank you once again to both of them at this point. So what really matters? We've got to start looking, of course, understanding the signs and symptoms. Here, I'm not talking about the ICD-10 diagnosis or definitions of hallucinations and different kinds of delusions and so on. I think we really need to be perceptive of the social impact of all these symptoms on the woman and her family and the environment as a whole. We have to, it matters the treatment choices in front of us and what are the choices that we are giving the woman and her family. And of course, the physical health concerns need to be a top priority. What works? Evidence suggests that medical and psychosocial treatments work. There are a number of psychological interventions that have seen to make a lot of, impact on the recovery. Work and leisure activities definitely plays a big role, and there is evidence to suggest that. But what does experience indicate? I think we need to listen to those voices that woman is talking about. We need to listen without a judgment on all the delusions that she is talking about or the delusions as reported by the family. I think she deserves equitable opportunities. She should be allowed to make a choice of the sari that she wears, the haircut that she wants, and the food that she wants to eat. We have a number of challenges. Will a standalone medical model approach work? I don't think so. And I think most of us here in this audience will agree that this will definitely not work. Although a large number of our, colleagues in private practice often have to do a standalone medical model practice. The misconceptions require a lot of public awareness campaigns. And I'm really happy to hear that the MPA is planning on a year-long of awareness. And I'm sure with the repeated messaging, people will hear, people will understand, and hopefully the society's responses will change. So what needs to be done? I think we need to listen, we need to communicate appropriately, and we need to provide choices. More than anything else, I think we need to respect the woman with schizophrenia. Here is a small disclaimer. I think we also need to remember, while I positioned my talk today on the woman, essentially because it was to celebrate the International Women's Day, we also need to remember the man with schizophrenia, the man who is a caregiver, and equally, which are both equally important topics. Maybe another lecture for another day. I would like to end my presentation with a small poem. Please bear with me because I think this was a very, emotional Then came a turning point. A specialist we met, an angel from heaven. We heard the strange word schizophrenia. We now understood what was happening, what was to follow. Medications, therapies, kind words, optimism. My princess has turned around, and I've since realized I needed to change, to accept, to see the change, to bring about the change. I realized I need to be there for her. I thought this was a very poignant, submission by a father who actually stopped to understand what the problem his daughter was going through. I would like to end my presentations with the two women who are the reasons for who I am today, Dr. Sharada Menon and Dr. Tara. Thank you for this opportunity to make this presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Padmavati, for that very comprehensive coverage of an important aspect of psychiatric illness, particularly focusing on the staff of our society. I congratulate you for a very good coverage. And I must say that your case examples, the case vignettes, really enriched the presentation because you could see the actual problems. These are things which people face. To this day, shamefacedly, we acknowledge that we call them the fairer sex, but we neglect them a lot. And I even now notice that in families where there are two people ill, if there is a sexual dichotomy, gender dichotomy, then the man gets this maybe minor, but the woman's major illness gets a backseat. Of course, the trend has changed in the last 30 years, 30 plus years that we have been in the field, you and I, but it's still very much there. The other point that came across very strongly was the conundrum that attends on marriage. We still have most of our people going in for arranged marriages, and women patients, more than men patients who are married off, there is this still prevalent notion, shadi kar do, sab theek ho jayega. Madhuve maadbidi ella sariyagagutte. As though that loneliness is the only, romantic loneliness is the only component that needs addressing when you have severe mental illness that prevails up to this day. Stigma attends on mental illness, particularly chronic mental illness. And the stigma is related to apprehension. You mentioned the father who would not let the child go out. There is always the fear, what will she do outside? Will she do something which brings shame to the family? Will she endanger herself? And I think this needs adequate addressing. You have very clearly shown us through examples how this might be tackled with. We have one question from our own Dr. Mohan Isaac. How can we make things better for women with the diagnosis of schizophrenia? Is there a specific role? Are there any specific roles and responsibilities for NGOs such as yours, which focuses on schizophrenia, or ours, which focuses on mental illness in general? Padma, would you like to take this up? Dr. Mohan's question.
Thank you, Dr. Mohan Isaac, for this question, which really requires a lot of reflections. And I'm sure this August gathering here will be able to put in a lot more. But before I leave it open to the floor, let me just, I think the most important thing that we must do, not just as NGOs, more as professionals, is respect the woman. Respect the woman. And I think that's important because very important to note is if a man has schizophrenia, I've seen many young men with schizophrenia who are actually, pardon my use of the term, but actually mollycoddled either by the mother or by the wife, right? Everything is done for them. When it is a woman with schizophrenia, we need to be perceptive of the fact that she still needs to do her household work. Maybe she needs to, give birth to a child. Whether they allow her to take care of the child or no is a different issue. But she has to do her duties towards whatever societal role functions are defined for her. The fact that she has schizophrenia is really, set aside. And to me, that's very painful, right? Because every woman with the problem definitely seems to be suffering a lot more than, the men. And, when we try and tell the woman caregiver that, look, maybe you should get your, it's my favorite strategy to tell women that you please allow your son to wash his own dinner plate or wash his coffee cup? No, the answer is no. Why should he do it? No, I will do it for him. I will take care of him. But when it is a woman, you know, she does not even wash her dinner plate. She does not. The coffee cup is left where it is, right? And I think this just, as NGOs, it's our responsibility. I'm not talking about just NGOs. I think as mental health professionals in the field, wherever we are, we need to be sensitive to this. We need to pick up on this, and maybe if we say, they may listen. This is my call on this topic. And if anyone else has any other thoughts on this, Dr. Mohan Isaac, you yourself may have some thoughts on this. I really want to listen.
We have one more question, Padma. We have a question which says, what are the ways to encourage the person affected with this illness?
Yes. I think this is where the psychosocial approaches come into play. The first thing is that a very motivating demeanor by the mental health professionals themselves. I mean, it's many times I've heard my colleagues to say, this person cannot do anything, will not do anything, and so on. I think that's something we must veer away from them. We need to encourage them. We need to keep talking to them about it. Encourage the small steps that they've taken. I remember Dr. Sharda Menon, even 3 weeks before her demise, reminded me of the story of how she first started her residential care and how she made people, men and women, sweep the floor, heat their own, make their own tea and coffee, make their own rice and so on. And I think it was very important because if she was not encouraging them to do a daily chore, she was also giving tasks. I think baby steps are necessary. Baby steps should not remain at baby steps. They need to allow them to go into longer strides as well. The next question also.
Do you have anything to say about this arranged marriage? Get the person married off and everything will be all right. How are we to battle this very, very common notion?
I do see, unfortunately, this is really a question. I'm going to throw this question back at you. There are no clear genetic evidences to say that, we do have a lot of studies now, especially with the Jivas, which do talk about this chromosome and that. But is there enough research evidence to tell us that this woman cannot get married? However, you are actually reflecting on this fact, this myth and misconceptions that shadi ho gaya to sab theek ho jayega. Kalyanam pannina seriya poidum. I think public education, public awareness that, that this is really not true needs to be an information that is stated time and again and again. And maybe one day it will reach the listener, reach the ears of the listener. The other, actually, from my perspective, even with marriage, among so-called normal, I'm using the word so-called normal people, I would ask them to think again and again before they actually make their choices. The young people do need to have the opportunity to make the choice. So I'm actually a little against arranged marriage, but that's for another forum. Let's not get into that sphere of discussion now.
Padma, there is this sexual frustration that comes with this illness because this illness imposes such isolation, such loneliness. What about that? How do we help people cope with this loneliness when they have schizophrenia? And no matter how many new drugs have been introduced, to this day, the prognosis for schizophrenia is not great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I do, take your point out here. As I was making this presentation, I realized that I had missed out on this. Although it was pretty exhaustive, I had missed out on this very, very important area that we need to bring to a public forum, actually, although it's a very private matter. Now, one of the things that, when a young woman with schizophrenia, if I do get to know that she is going to get married, which is not very often, let me remind you, I do talk about sexual functioning to her. And maybe if we get the opportunity of course, this opportunity happens only after the marriage. I do get the husband into the conversation on the sexual functioning. So far, even if the woman caregiver and a husband who's suffering from schizophrenia who cannot perform sexually, we have to bring it out into the open, and at least in, when they do come in for a review, we need to talk to them about it. And this is an area, of course, where there are more questions raised than answers. However, I do think that it needs to be, because it does matter a lot to a lot of men and women, right?
It's a tough call, and I think we have to be quite creative in finding ethically correct solutions to this problem. We have two hands raised from the online audience. I don't know whether we have the facility to get them to ask their questions. Babita, who used to be with us, another dedicated woman executive at MPA till a few years ago. Babita, can you ask your question? In the chat box, it'll be a little easier. We also have a question from Aruna. The same thing goes for Aruna. If you can raise your hand, or, I mean, you've raised your hand. Can you ask your question? For Babita and Aruna, our own, can she self-motivate if there is less cooperation at home from the husband? This is schizophrenia.
Yes. Yeah, this is a very important question. I'm glad this has been raised. It matters to this woman that she has to learn, she has to motivate herself, right? And how can she do this by herself? So one of the things that can actually be put into praise is whenever she comes in for, I think the mental health professionals play a huge role in this arena. Remember, her motivation may actually be at very low levels. Her self-esteem might be at low levels for various reasons, right? Including the spouse and the spouse's family, right? So we do need to take, steps to make sure that as part of counseling, we need to address this issue of how she can actually build up her own skills. There was this young lady, I would like to share an example here for how this was done. So there was this young lady who was sent home by her husband, not a new story again. Her young son used to live in the very close to Bangalore in the Satya Sai Baba ashram. Now this lady was back in Chennai. She's actually she's from the Jain community, right? But had lived in Chennai for a very, very long time. Her husband actually had asked her, wanted nothing to do with her, though there was no formal divorce. So she continues to remain married to him. However, her own family, again, because on socio-cultural grounds, actually said, they were very derogatory to her. And she was used to be very upset about it. And she used to say, oh, my mother doesn't talk to me, my brother doesn't talk to me, and so on and so forth. So we had to actually work with her a lot on how she used to come to the daycare center for some time, where she actually learned to take care of herself, right? So we would do things like, ask her to, the social worker would spend a lot of time with her, talking to her about the little things that she could do to enhance her own self-worth, right? Over a period of time, she actually said, I'm interested in learning to do something with computers, learned the Excel, learned the Tally. And today she holds a job for herself. So she's really not bothered whether the husband calls her or not. Her brother recently died. So her sister-in-law said that you have to go and live in a separate room, separate house. So she now lives in a 1 BHK place, earning her own living, and which is remarkable. And today she's 50. So over the last 25 years, we have been able to build up on her. But one thing that really mattered here was the fact that she was in regular contact with the social worker. And that was an important thing. Yes, Dr. Babita.
Madam,
Yeah, madam,
any
just
reflection on employment opportunities and acceptance by society?
I'm sure, Dr. Babita, you'll agree that this has been a huge challenge for all of us in this field of psychosocial rehabilitation, where open employment opportunities are a struggle, but we also have, specifically opportunities for women. The challenges comes from two fronts. Number one, aside the fact that there may be few openings for this woman, few employers who are ready to take them on. The challenges also come from within the family, where the woman is really not allowed to, go out to work and say it's enough if you take care of the house. Right. So these are challenging issues, and we are trying to address it through, repeatedly talking in our caregiver education programs. We're trying to address these issues that young women who are capable and competent to work, they should be allowed to go to work. It's a big struggle, but I'm sure eventually we will get there if we keep repeatedly, stating this message again and again. Yeah. Now, I finished my slide. I finished my address on caregivers in one slide, right? But again, that was a very intentional thing because I wanted more time to discuss, and I'm really thanking Dr. Chandrasekhar for bringing this up in a big way. We very often neglect our caregivers, right? And the only interaction that sometimes happens in a now crowded outpatient is, how is this patient? How are they? Are they taking their medicines? Are they sleeping well? Are they eating well? Are they doing their jobs well? Do we stop to ask, really, how are you doing? What is happening to you? What are the problems that you are facing, right? And this is something that I've learned over time. I mean, when I started first clinical work, this is exactly what I would do. But over a period of time, I did learn. It was actually a woman caregiver who gave me this, who asked me this very relevant question. She said, "Doctor, you never asked me how I am." This is a very straightforward question, but it was an eye-opener to me. So today, I do spend that 1 minute or two asking the caregiver who accompanies the patient how they are, what are they doing, how does what are the challenges, not just focusing attention on challenges because of schizophrenia, but the other challenges, and what really, aimed to be a 1 minute conversation often lands up as a 30-minute conversation just about the caregiver. But I think we need to give them that listening ear, and a lot of time this attention focuses on what they can do for, taking care of themselves. And of course, I place a heavy emphasis on physical health concerns of the caregiver. Not just that, I mean, that 30-minute daily walk 5 days a week is a mantra that I keep repeating even to the caregivers, not just the patients. And sometimes they comply, right? But I think if we keep talking to them again and again, it may happen that they will listen one day. Yeah. Dr. Mohan Isaac actually has brought to attention Amrit Bakshi's book on caring for the mentally ill. And I think to those who have not read that book, please try and get a copy, because I think we as mental health professionals will learn a lot from his experiences. So thank you, Dr. Mohan, for this.
Mohan Isaac has one observation and one question about women who stand by and look after a relative, somebody very dear to them. And the classic example is the Nobel laureate John Nash's wife, Alicia Nash. What a toll it takes on the caregiver. It happens the other way also. There are men who look after a wife or a sister, sometimes a mother. I've written about this, as well as sister, mother, or daughter. So would you have any comments to make about that?
It is, it's indeed, important that we pay attention to them as well. In SCARF, we have instituted what is called as the Maitri Award. And whenever we identify a caregiver of either gender who have done such remarkable work, we do try and get them onto the podium to say what they have done, to say how they have done it. And it really matters to them that their work has been acknowledged. And at every point in time, we as mental health professionals, I think it is it's not just our medical duty, but it's also our social duty to make sure that we encourage all these caregivers who have done remarkable work, very often without any judgment, very often without any complaints. And I think these are really people who can, the lived experience of these caregivers can tell us a lot of stories and teach us what our textbooks cannot.
Reminded also of the international pilot study of schizophrenia in its first report, schizophrenia through 6 countries, which India was one of the participants from its center at Agra. The famous Professor K.C. Dubey was the Indian participant. And they found that the prognosis in India was generally better than prognosis anywhere in developed countries. And the reason for that was not that the illness recovered, but the illness,
the family support.
Whereas of the people suffering, whereas that was not in the West. You're out on your bottom if you're not productive. That was especially the American, but generally the Western norm. And I think, unfortunately, as we emulate the West and all the wrong things, that is becoming the case in our country as well. But hats off to SCAR. I'm very glad that you showed the slide of Amma, Dr. Sharada Menon, who we lost recently. Of course, she had a full innings and she was very gracious right up to the end. Very glad that her memory was invoked today. And you are a worthy successor in that line with Amma, then Tara, and now you. We look forward to a greater cooperation with you, and we look forward to your association with MPA, not only through SCARF, but even in your individual capacity in the future. I'm sorry, all good things have to come to an end. And I'd like to thank Professor Padmavati for her very, you'll allow me to a little manfully standing in here and filling in what we needed to be told. What does it matter to a woman, schizophrenia? Thanks very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank the gods of the net who allowed this to go on somewhat smoothly. And I must apologize for another goddess called Eco, who slightly impaired our communication today. Thank you very much. May I now invite the chair of our Public Service, Public Education Committee, Ms. Mrinalini Shinde, to propose a vote of thanks.
I hope Dr. Padmavati is still online. I'm not really sure.
Yes, I am.
I am. In addition to doing the word of thanks, I wanted to just share one experience while I worked at MPA. From a caregiver's perspective, I could hear there was some discussion around that. I started working in Medical Pastoral Association in 91 October, right after my postgraduate studies. I didn't know much about this is what it actually means in real life. But about a year and a half after working here, I just became really unwell, physically unwell, had a fever, had to leave from work, go home. Of course, my colleagues helped, but it turned out to be a throat infection, which became a recurring infection. I had to take 6 rounds of antibiotics. And during one of those times, I would come to work for a couple of days, I would get sick again, have to go back to the doctor and so on. But I had a dream one night. And in that dream, I remember going to the doctor and I saw his prescription pad, and I remember it to this day, which is 30 years ago now, almost. And on his prescription pad, he wrote my medication. I didn't have a diagnosis, but he wrote my medication, and it was Orap. And, you know, I had to take 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, 1 at night. It was my dream, but I remember what I experienced seeing that medication being prescribed. I believe it gave me a whole new perspective as to what caregivers experience when they bring their person to Medical Pastoral Association. I think that whole learning made me, in some ways, more compassionate towards the caregiver. And I thank you, Dr. Padmavati, for bringing up those very pertinent issues, because that's what we are hoping to do, that as we learn new things, perhaps recall some things that we may have already known, is to equip caregivers as both professional and those at home to be more sensitive and responsive to the actual needs that people may be experiencing. I also wanted to share that I wanted to thank you, especially us, with your expertise and your experience and your time this afternoon, but also for the learning that all of us have had in listening to you. I believe there are also some things that we can take home and sort of reflect and think about. One of the things that you brought out was that we don't pay attention to the physical health sometimes. And I remember working here and thinking, oh my God, if their symptoms are under control, it's okay if they're physically unwell. because it felt like I was controlling the worst problem. But thank you that, you know, we are beginning to recognize that it's important to treat the whole person and to keep that whole perspective as we hope to enhance well-being of people entrusted to our care. So thank you so much, Dr. Padmavati. We hope that we will have more interactions with you as the year progresses and we celebrate 50 years of service at Medico Pastoral Association. It's my joy and delight actually on behalf of the Managing Committee of MPA, the chair of our Golden Jubilee celebrations, Dr. Mohan Isaac, to be able to thank several people, our chief guest and speaker, Dr. Aarti, who sort of was the embodiment of the partnership that is ongoing between NIMHANS and Medico Pastoral Association that has contributed so much to what we do and have done over the last 50 years. Thank you, Dr. Aarti. I don't think we could have chosen a better MC who was so present and held audience and presenters in this hybrid mode, in person as well as online, so beautifully with such calm and poise. Thank you, Dr. Aarti. It was really wonderful having you. You're part of MP and part of NIMHANS, and you did a superb job. To Dipanjana, our very own, for coordinating the felicitation event. So, you know, she got the things organized and made sure it was done from the aarti at the door to the lighting of the lamp. Every part. Thank you, Dipanjana. Dr. Ajit Bide for I don't know if anybody who moderates things and says things so well. He also was responsible for inviting Dr. Padmavati himself. I think perhaps one of the reasons why she agreed. And also for supporting several events through the program. Of course, Dr. Mohan Isaac, without whose support, none of this would have happened. To other members of the managing committee, our secretary, who along with the staff worked tirelessly. Thank you, staff. You know, we sit in committee meetings and make decisions and plan programs, but it actually happens on the ground because the staff do all the work. And so we want to recognize Bhaskar and the counseling team. So thank you, and all the halfway home coordinator and all of the various support staff who make the place beautiful for us to be able to come in and just so comfortable. Thank you, residents of MPA, who graciously welcome us to your home each time we decide to come here. So thank you very much. I have a whole list of people, Micro Labs, for no questions asked and supporting our every event. Thank you. I think there's Printo, and there are Desi Pearls, and there is Arun Tens, and so on. Thank you so much for your support in your part. Dr. Gladys and Dr. Tilaka, hats off to both of you for your selfless service in the past, and for your continuing championing of and support of MPA, and not just MPA, but the support of the whole cause of mental health. With that, I think I've done a fairly complete job, not forgetting anyone. And if I have, it's been unintentional. Sorry. But thank you all for a wonderful, meaningful afternoon. Dr. Padmavati, once again, thank you. She's been traveling a lot, and thank you for making this time available to us. And to all of you for being here. It takes some amount of planning and sacrifice. To our president, you will not believe how calm he is.